Okay, so get this. The U.S. government has lost nukes.
What?
Not misplaced,
Yeah.
not temporarily out of sight,
Right.
but straight up lost.
It's lost.
Like somewhere out there, maybe on the ocean floor, is a nuclear weapon just chilling.
Wow.
How is that even possible?
It's a chilling thought.
Right.
And it speaks to this larger issue that I think we're diving into today.
Yeah.
The history, the science, and frankly, the surprisingly fragile nature of nuclear weapons.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
Before we get to the lost nukes and all the near misses that'll probably keep me up tonight.
Sure.
Let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
What exactly makes a nuke?
At the core of it all is either fission or fusion.
Okay.
Processes that release tremendous amounts of energy by manipulating atoms.
Right.
Fission is splitting an atom.
Okay.
Kind of like breaking a stick.
Gotcha.
While fusion is squeezing atoms together until they combine, both release energy. Yeah.
But fusion is on a whole other level.
Okay.
Think of it like the difference between a firecracker and the sun.
And we actually saw that power firsthand with the Trinity test back in July 1945.
Yeah.
I can only imagine witnessing that.
Oh, yeah.
And realizing the sheer force they unleashed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Robert Oppenheimer, a lead scientist on the Manhattan Project, famously said after the Trinity test, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Yeah.
It wasn't just a scientific achievement.
Right.
It was a turning point in human history, and not necessarily for the better.
That quote really sends shivers down my spine.
Yeah.
And to think that was just the beginning.
Right.
From there, it was a nuclear arms race. Over 400 atmospheric tests by 1962. Did they not realize the environmental impact?
Well, the understanding of long-term environmental consequences was still developing at that time.
Oh, okay.
The focus, unfortunately, was primarily on the destructive power.
And strategic implications of these weapons.
Right.
These 400 tests
Yeah.
weren't just giant explosions.
Right.
They released massive amounts of radiation into the atmosphere, which eventually settles back down to Earth, contaminating the environment. We're talking soil, water, even the air we breathe.
So not just an immediate threat, but a long-lasting one as well.
Absolutely.
And even with all those tests and the stark reality of the destruction they cause, we still sit here today with thousands of nuclear weapons worldwide.
Roughly 13,000,
Wow.
to be a bit more precise.
Oh.
And that's after decades of supposedly working towards disarmament.
Wow.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
It is.
And the U.S. and Russia control over 90% of that stockpile.
Wow.
Which brings us to another concept that shaped the Cold War.
Yeah.
Mutually assured destruction.
Right.
Or MADI.
The whole, if you nuke us, we nuke you back idea. But relying on that logic seems incredibly risky, almost naive.
Yeah.
What if a leader isn't thinking rationally?
Right.
Or there's a miscalculation?
Yeah.
It seems like Mega D only works if everyone involved acts perfectly all the time. Which, let's be honest, isn't how humans operate.
You've hit upon a critical flaw in the logic of Emmy.
Okay.
It assumes rational actors, perfect information, and flawless technology. In reality, none of those things are guaranteed, and history is full of examples where things went wrong.
Okay.
Sometimes terrifyingly so.
Yeah.
Take the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example.
Okay.
A Soviet submarine nearly launched a nuclear torpedo because they thought they were under attack.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
I thought the Cuban Missile Crisis was all about tense negotiations and back-channel diplomacy? I didn't know it came that close to an actual nuclear launch.
It did. And it's a testament to how fragile the situation truly was.
Yeah.
The submarine crew was authorized to launch if they believed they were under attack.
Right.
And they very nearly did.
Oh, wow.
It was only because one officer, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to give his consent that the launch was prevented.
Wow.
He basically saved the world by keeping a cool head in the midst of chaos.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of Vasily Arkhipov before.
It's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah, but his story is a powerful reminder of how individual choices can have a massive impact, especially in situations with such high stakes.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, how many other close calls have there been that we don't even know about?
More than we'd like to think, I'm sure.
Yeah, I bet.
And the Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't the only time we came close to the brink.
Okay.
Remember the 1983 Soviet radar incident?
Refresh my memory. That's the one where their system malfunctioned, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
A false alarm made it look like the U.S. had launched a nuclear attack on the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet officer monitoring the system, correctly identified it as a false alarm.
Wow.
And chose not to report it as a real attack.
Wow.
Again,
yeah.
One person's judgment prevented a potential nuclear war.
That's wild.
It's both reassuring and terrifying. To realize how much can hinge on the actions of a single individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, that's 2 close calls already?
Uh-huh.
You mentioned there were more.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
There was the 1979 NORAD incident.
Okay.
Where a training tape simulating a Soviet attack was accidentally loaded into the live system.
Wow.
For 6 long minutes.
Okay.
The U.S. military believed a real attack was underway.
Hold on.
Yeah.
They just accidentally loaded the wrong tape.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's all it took.
That's what almost started a nuclear war.
Yep.
It seems almost unbelievable.
Right.
Like something out of a dark comedy rather than reality.
It highlights a chilling truth.
Yeah.
That even with all the sophisticated technology and supposedly fail-safe systems, human error and sheer dumb luck can still play a significant role.
Wow.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what other vulnerabilities exist that we haven't even considered.
Right.
You're not going to tell me about nukes being vulnerable to squirrels chewing through wires, are you?
Not squirrels.
Okay.
But you might be surprised to learn that some nuclear weapons have been surprisingly vulnerable to lightning strikes.
You're kidding, right?
Nope.
Lightning can set off a nuke.
It's true.
That sounds more like science fiction than fact.
And it's part of a larger issue.
Okay.
With the design and maintenance of these weapons back in the 1960s, the U.S. Air Force discovered that some of their nuclear warheads were susceptible to being accidentally triggered by lightning.
Oh, wow.
They had to scramble to modify them to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then there was the issue of faulty wiring in some bombs, which could cause them to detonate during transport.
So it's not just about preventing intentional launches or avoiding miscalculations during a crisis. It's also about the potential for accidents.
Right.
Technical glitches.
Absolutely.
And even freak weather events.
You got it.
It really makes you question the supposed safety and security of these weapons.
It does.
Yeah.
And it underscores the inherent risks involved in maintaining a nuclear arsenal.
Okay.
But even setting aside those risks for a moment.
Yeah.
There's another aspect of nuclear weapons that we haven't even touched on yet.
Right.
The environmental fallout they leave behind, even when they're not detonated.
I mean, like the contamination from those hundreds of atmospheric tests we talked about earlier?
Exactly.
Right.
But it goes beyond that.
Right.
The production, maintenance, and eventual dismantlement of nuclear weapons all produce radioactive waste that has to be dealt with.
Right, of course.
And then there's the potential for accidents.
Yeah.
During transport or storage. Remember that incident in Damascus, Arkansas?
I'm drawing a blank.
Okay.
What happened there?
It involved a Titan II missile silo back in 1980.
Okay.
A maintenance worker accidentally dropped a wrench, which punctured the missile's fuel tank and caused a massive explosion.
Wow.
The nuclear warhead itself didn't detonate.
Oh, okay.
But it was a close call.
So even routine maintenance carries a risk of disaster.
It does.
It's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, the whole lost nukes thing is still bugging me.
Okay.
How does a country just lose track of a nuclear weapon?
Well, sometimes they're lost in accidents.
Okay.
Like the Tybee Island incident in 1958.
Okay.
Where a U.S. bomber accidentally dropped a hydrogen bomb into the ocean.
Oh, wow.
They never found it.
Really?
And there are other cases where the circumstances surrounding the loss
are shrouded in secrecy.
So there's a chance that somewhere out there, at this very moment, a lost nuke is just sitting on the ocean floor.
Could be.
Waiting to be discovered.
It's a disturbing thought, isn't it?
It is.
And it speaks to a larger issue of accountability and transparency when it comes to these weapons.
Right.
We'll delve into that more in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, before we move on,
sure.
I think I need a moment to process all of this.
I understand.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, the reality of nuclear weapons is far more complex and unnerving than most people realize.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten to the whole concept of nuclear winter yet.
That's a topic for our next discussion.
Oh, great.
And trust me, it's one you won't want to miss.
Okay.
All right, let's pick up where we left off.
Okay.
Those lost nukes are definitely a chilling thought to ponder.
Yeah, for sure.
But shifting gears a bit, let's talk about another unsettling consequence of nuclear weapons.
Okay.
The environmental fallout.
Okay.
It's something that often gets overshadowed by
Right.
the immediate threat of nuclear war,
Yeah.
but the impact is far-reaching and long-lasting.
You're right. We often hear about places like Chernobyl and Fukushima,
Right.
but those were nuclear power plant disasters,
Right.
not weapons detonations.
Yeah.
What kind of impact did all those atmospheric tests during the Cold War have on the environment?
Yeah.
Did they even understand the consequences back then?
The understanding of long-term environmental and health impacts was still developing during that era.
I see.
But regardless, over 400 atmospheric nuclear tests were conducted
Wow.
between 1945 and 1963.
Okay.
Those detonations released enormous amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere.
Right.
This material is carried by winds
Yeah.
and eventually falls back to Earth,
Right.
and contaminating the soil,
Okay.
water sources,
Yeah.
and even the air we breathe.
So we're talking about contamination on a global scale.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And some areas were significantly impacted
Huh.
due to their proximity to test sites.
Yeah.
Places like the Nevada test site in the U.S.,
Okay.
the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific,
Right.
and the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan
Okay.
still show elevated levels of radiation today.
Wow. I had no idea the effects were so widespread and long-lasting.
Yeah.
You mentioned health impacts.
Yes.
Are we talking about immediate radiation sickness
Oh,
or something more insidious?
both, actually.
Oh, wow.
Immediate radiation sickness can occur from high levels of exposure,
Okay.
leading to a range of symptoms and potentially fatal outcomes.
Right.
But there are also the long-term effects,
Mm.
like an increased risk of cancer,
Right.
birth defects,
All right.
and other health problems
Okay.
that can manifest years or even decades after exposure.
Wow.
The studies on communities living near those test sites
Yeah.
paint a pretty grim picture.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
It's a stark reminder
Yeah.
that the consequences of these weapons
Mm-hmm.
extend far beyond the immediate blast zone
That's right.
and can impact generations to come.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have a question about something you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
Nuclear winter.
Okay.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
I know, right?
Is it really a credible threat?
It is.
Okay.
And scientists have been warning about the potential for nuclear winter for decades.
Okay.
The theory is based on the idea
Yeah.
that a large-scale nuclear war
Yeah.
wouldn't just cause immediate destruction,
Right.
but would also loft massive amounts of dust and smoke into the atmosphere,
Okay.
blocking out sunlight
Right.
and disrupting global climate patterns.
So imagine a prolonged period of darkness,
Yes.
plummeting temperatures,
Uh-huh.
and widespread crop failures.
Yeah,
That's the potential scenario we're talking about.
exactly.
So not only would there be the immediate devastation from the blasts and radiation,
Right.
but the planet itself would become hostile to life.
That's the idea.
That's a horrifying thought.
Yeah.
And even those who managed to survive the initial blasts
Right.
would face a whole new set of challenges just trying to survive in a world like that.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's a truly global threat.
Yeah.
Even countries that weren't directly involved in the conflict
Right.
would suffer the consequences of nuclear winter.
Yep.
And the long-term environmental damage
Yeah.
could make it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to rebuild and recover.
Wow. This is really heavy stuff.
It is.
Knowing all of this, it's hard to believe that we're still living under the threat of nuclear war.
I hear you.
It all seems so senseless.
I understand that feeling.
Yeah.
It can be overwhelming
Yeah.
to think about the sheer destructive power of these weapons
Right.
and the potential consequences of their use.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember
Okay.
that while the dangers are real,
Uh-huh.
there are also reasons for hope.
Okay, good.
There are people and organizations working tirelessly
All right.
to reduce these risks
Yeah.
and ultimately eliminate nuclear weapons altogether.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Because up until now,
Yeah.
this whole conversation has been pretty doom and gloom.
Right.
So let's talk about those solutions.
Okay.
What's being done to prevent a nuclear catastrophe?
Well, for starters,
Yeah.
there's the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons,
Okay.
or NPT,
NPT. Okay.
which has been signed by the vast majority of countries worldwide.
Gotcha.
It aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons to countries that don't already have them. Promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy.
Right.
And work towards complete nuclear disarmament.
So it's like a global agreement to try and keep nukes in check.
Yeah.
But does it actually work? I mean, we still have thousands of these weapons out there.
It's not a perfect solution.
Right.
And there are certainly challenges and limitations. But the NPT has been relatively successful in slowing the proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Okay.
There's also the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty.
Okay.
Or CTBT.
CTBT.
Okay, which aims to ban all nuclear explosions everywhere.
So no more testing.
Right.
No more developing new and even more terrifying weapons.
Right.
That sounds like a good thing.
It is.
Is everyone on board with that?
That's the goal.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the CTBT hasn't yet entered into force.
Really?
Because it requires ratification by certain key states.
Okay.
Including the U.S.
I see.
However, the fact that it exists and that so many countries have signed on is a positive step in the right direction.
Okay. What about the existing stockpiles? Those thousands of nukes just sitting there waiting to be used.
Right.
What's being done about those?
There have been significant efforts towards nuclear disarmament, particularly between the U.S. and Russia. They've signed treaties, like the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START,
okay.
and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty,
INF, okay.
which have led to the dismantling of thousands of nuclear warheads.
Okay, so there has been some progress.
There has.
Even if it feels slow at times.
Right.
But dismantling a nuke doesn't just make it disappear, right?
No, it doesn't.
What happens to all that nuclear material?
Right.
I mean, it's still incredibly dangerous.
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
The process of dismantling nuclear weapons is complex.
Right.
And requires careful handling of the highly radioactive materials involved.
Yeah.
There are international programs and guidelines in place for safely storing and disposing of this material.
Right.
But it remains a significant challenge.
And of course, there's always the risk of that material falling into the wrong hands.
Absolutely.
Like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So it's not just about dismantling existing weapons,
right,
but also about securing and accounting for all that loose nuclear material floating around.
It is. We need stronger international cooperation, transparency, and robust safeguards to prevent theft, smuggling, or illicit trafficking of nuclear materials.
Okay.
It's a continuous effort that demands vigilance and collaboration on a global scale.
Okay, so treaties, disarmament efforts, securing materials.
Right.
Those are all important pieces of the puzzle.
They are.
But what about shifting the mindset? How do we move away from this Cold War mentality where nuclear weapons are seen as a necessary deterrent?
Right.
I mean, wasn't that whole logic based on fear and mistrust?
You're right. The Cold War logic was deeply rooted in fear and mistrust.
Okay.
And it's a challenging mindset to shift.
Yeah. I mean,
especially for countries that have built their entire security doctrines around the possession of nuclear weapons.
Right.
But I think it starts with fostering a culture of peace and dialogue, investing in diplomacy, conflict resolution, and building trust between nations.
Right.
We need to address the root causes of conflict and insecurity that lead countries to feel the need for nuclear weapons in the first place.
So it's about tackling the bigger picture.
Yes.
Poverty, inequality, political instability,
right,
all the things that create fertile ground for conflict and mistrust.
Exactly. It's about understanding that true security doesn't come from stockpiling weapons of mass destruction, but from addressing the underlying issues that drive conflict and create instability. It's about investing in human development, promoting sustainable economies, and fostering international cooperation. It's a long and complex process, but ultimately, I believe it's the only path to a truly secure and peaceful world.
It sounds idealistic.
It does.
But also incredibly challenging. Especially in today's world, where we're seeing a rise in nationalism, political polarization, and geopolitical tensions.
It's a lot. I agree. It won't be easy, but I believe it's possible. We've seen remarkable progress in other areas, like the global movement to combat climate change,
right,
or the fight for human rights.
Yeah.
These are complex systemic issues.
Yeah.
But people are coming together to demand change.
Okay.
And the same can happen with nuclear weapons.
So what can we do as individuals to contribute to this shift?
Yeah.
It can feel overwhelming.
It can.
To think about how to make a difference in the face of such a massive global issue.
I hear you.
Yeah.
But there are things we can do.
Okay.
Staying informed is crucial.
Okay.
Learn about the issues.
Right.
Engage in thoughtful conversations. And challenge the narratives that perpetuate fear and division.
Okay.
Support organizations working for peace and disarmament.
Right.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to speak out.
Speak out.
Yeah.
You mean like contact our elected officials?
Exactly. And advocate for policies that prioritize diplomacy and cooperation.
Gotcha.
Every voice counts. Raising awareness. Sharing your concerns.
Right.
And demanding action from our leaders can make a difference.
Okay.
Collective action is what drives change.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not about living in fear,
right,
but about being aware and taking action.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive bystanders in this story.
Nope.
We have agency.
Uh-huh.
We have a voice.
Yes.
And we have a responsibility to act.
You got it.
The future is not preordained.
Right.
It's shaped by the choices we make today.
Well said.
Yeah.
We have a lot more to discuss.
Okay.
About potential solutions and reasons for hope.
Okay.
But I think that's a good place to pause for now.
Okay. Okay, I'm still processing everything we talked about in the last two parts.
Yeah.
The near misses.
Right.
The environmental damage.
Right.
The sheer number of nukes out there.
A lot.
It's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
But you mentioned there's reason for hope.
Yeah, there is.
That people are working towards solutions. So let's dive into that.
Okay.
Where do we even begin to tackle a problem as massive as the threat of nuclear war?
What's a complex issue with no easy answers?
Right.
But there are concrete steps being taken to mitigate the risks and work towards a world free of nuclear weapons.
Okay.
We touched on some of them already.
Yeah.
Treaties like the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty.
Right.
These are examples of international cooperation aimed at preventing the spread of these weapons and limiting their testing.
Right. But those treaties don't eliminate the existing stockpiles.
They don't.
What about the thousands of nukes that are already out there?
Right.
What can be done about those?
That's where disarmament efforts come in.
Okay.
The U.S. and Russia, as the holders of the vast majority of nuclear weapons, have been engaged in negotiations and treaties aimed at reducing their arsenals.
Okay.
Treaties like START.
Right.
The Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty have led to significant reductions in the number of deployed warheads.
That's encouraging.
It is.
But dismantling a nuke isn't as simple as just taking it apart, right?
It's not.
What happens to all that nuclear material?
Right.
I mean, it's still incredibly dangerous.
You're right. It's a complex and delicate process.
Right.
Disassembling nuclear warheads requires specialized facilities and strict safety protocols to ensure the radioactive material is handled and disposed of properly.
Right.
There are international programs and guidelines in place to oversee this process.
Yeah.
But it's an ongoing challenge that requires constant vigilance and cooperation.
And even with those safeguards, there's still a risk that some of that material could fall into the wrong hands. Didn't we talk about how there's a lot of unaccounted for plutonium and uranium out there?
We did.
Yeah.
That's a major concern.
Right.
Securing nuclear materials and preventing their theft or diversion is crucial.
Right.
It requires robust security measures,
Okay.
international cooperation, and transparency to track and account for these materials throughout their life cycle.
Okay. So we have treaties to limit the spread.
Yes.
Disarmament efforts to reduce the number of weapons.
Right.
And security measures to protect the materials. Those are all important steps.
They are.
But it still feels like we're dealing with symptoms rather than addressing the root cause of the problem. How do we move away from the whole idea that nuclear weapons are necessary in the first place?
That's the fundamental question, isn't it?
It is.
It requires a shift in mindset.
Yeah.
A move away from the Cold War logic of deterrence based on fear and mistrust.
Right.
We need to cultivate a culture of peace and diplomacy, where countries feel secure enough to not rely on the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Easier said than done, right?
It is.
I mean, how do you convince countries that have built their entire security strategies around nuclear weapons
to
just give them up?
It's a long and complex process.
Right.
But I think it starts with addressing the underlying causes of conflict and insecurity, investing in diplomacy, conflict resolution, and building trust between nations is crucial.
Right.
We need to create a global environment where countries feel less threatened and more inclined to cooperate.
So it's about tackling the bigger picture.
It is.
Poverty, inequality, political instability, all the things that can fuel conflict and mistrust.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that true security doesn't come from stockpiling weapons, but from addressing the root causes of conflict and creating a more just and equitable world.
It's a big, ambitious goal. But I can see how it ties into the whole idea of a nuclear-free world.
Right.
But let's be realistic.
Okay.
We're seeing a resurgence of nationalism.
Yeah.
Political polarization and geopolitical tensions in many parts of the world.
Right.
Does that make this goal even more challenging?
It certainly adds to the complexity.
Yeah.
But I don't think it makes the goal unattainable.
Okay.
Look at the progress that's been made on other seemingly intractable global issues, like climate change and human rights. These are challenging systemic problems.
Yeah.
But people are coming together to demand change.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see real progress.
Okay.
Same can happen with nuclear weapons.
Okay. That's a bit more optimistic than I was expecting.
Good.
So where do we go from here?
Well,
what can we as individuals do to contribute to this shift?
First and foremost, stay informed and engaged.
Okay.
Learn about the issues.
Right.
Talk about them with your friends and family. And challenge the narratives that perpetuate fear and division.
Okay.
Support organizations working for peace and disarmament.
Yeah.
Contact your elected officials.
Right.
And let them know that you prioritize diplomacy and cooperation over military buildup.
So it's about raising awareness.
Yes.
Having those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
And making our voices heard.
Exactly. It can feel overwhelming to think about making a difference on a global scale.
Right.
But remember, every voice counts. Collective action is what drives change.
Yeah.
And it starts with each of us taking responsibility and doing what we can.
Well, I have to admit, this conversation has been a roller coaster of emotions.
It has.
From fear and despair to a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
I'm still grappling with the scale and complexity of the issue.
I hear you.
But I also feel a sense of empowerment.
Good.
Knowing that there are things we can do to make a difference.
That's the key takeaway I hope you and our listeners walk away with.
Yeah.
It's not about living in fear, but about being informed, engaged, and taking action.
Okay.
The future is not predetermined. Yeah. It's shaped by the choices we make today.
Well said.
Thank you.
And on that note,
I
think we've reached the end of our nuclear deep dive.
I think we have.
It's been a journey, to say the least.
It certainly has.
We've covered a lot of ground.
It has.
The history, the science, the risks, and the potential solutions.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
But I hope our conversation has sparked some critical thinking.
I hope so.
And inspired our listeners to learn more and get involved.
I agree.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.
We know it was a heavy topic.
It was.
But hopefully you've gained some valuable insights.
I hope so.
Remember, knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And the more we understand about these issues, the better equipped we are to advocate for a safer and more peaceful world.
I agree.